Hello and welcome back to America's Forum. I'm John Bachman. We'll have more with former Congressman J.D. Hayworth and Newsmax's Morgan Thompson in just a second. But let's take a look real quickly at some of the big speeches from CPAC, and we'll discuss them here in just a second with Morgan and J.D. Paul Ryan, the former GOP vice presidential nominee and current chair of the House Budget Committee, addressed what he called the creative tension within the Republican Party.
And in a few years, I think we're going to look back at all of this creative tension. I think we're going to look back at 2014 as the time when we got it right, when we gave the country a real choice, when we earned back the people's trust. That's the moment we are in right now. This is the party that's forming. This is the battle of ideas that's happening. And this is the party that's going to do this so that we can finally save the American idea. Thank you very much for your participation here.
All right, also taking the podium yesterday, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Rubio appears to be attempting to reassert himself on the issue of foreign policy after he tried to take on a leadership role on immigration reform last year, but that effort kind of fell flat.
There is only one nation on earth capable of rallying and bringing together the free people on this planet to stand up to the spread of totalitarianism. There is only one nation on earth that can do that, and that is ours. The United Nations cannot do this. In fact, they cannot do anything.
And a guy who was not invited to CPAC last year took the main stage yesterday as well. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie tried to distance himself from the George Washington Bridge scandal. Chris Christie also did his best to cozy up with conservatives, including the influential Koch brothers, who have been the target of Senator Harry Reid recently.
The fact is, we've got to start talking about what we're for and not what we're against. Our ideas are better than their ideas, and that's what we have to stand up for. And if you need any further example of that, just look at what's going on in terms of what they're for in Washington, D.C. What they're for in Washington, D.C. is to have the leader of the Senate Democrats stand up and rail against two American entrepreneurs who have built a business, created jobs, and created wealth and philanthropy in this country. Harry Reid should get back to work and stop picking on great Americans who are creating great things in our country.
Well, Christie's crescendo came when he, the moderate, Christie, of course, made an appeal to those in the party further to his right.
We don't get to govern if we don't win. And it's not only bad when we don't get to govern because we don't get to mold and change our society. What's worse is they do. And they're doing it to us right now. So please, let us come out here resolved not only to stand for our principles, but let's come out of this conference resolved to win elections again. That's what I intend to do for the next year, and I hope you'll join me. Thank you very much.
All right, so it was a big day yesterday at CPAC. Now, we picked those three guys, J.D., because they're all looked at, and Morgan as well, looked at in some way, shape, or form, kind of the future of the Republican Party. But let's start with their comments, starting with Christie and his appeal to the ideological right of the party, who say, you know, you can't be wishy-washy on certain issues here. We got to win first before we can have any real change.
Well, let's take a look at that advice, which has been heeded by conservatives to swallow hard, embrace John McCain in 2008, to swallow hard, embrace Mitt Romney in 2012, and gee, those establishment Republicans haven't exactly fared well, despite the energies of many conservatives who swallowed hard to go with them. No, I think in the broader context, I thought it was interesting to hear Paul Ryan talk about, quote, creative tension. This is not creative tension, Morgan. This is not something you brand. These are legitimate discussions about issues confronting the American people where people of goodwill, even from the same party, can disagree. So I wonder about that branding.
That's a good thing. You know, it's the more we talk about it, the more we disagree, the more we get ideas out there, the more we work towards it. And, you know, going back to what Christie said, that actually stood out for me more than anything else that was said, because he's got a point. We're looking at the last two elections, Democrat, Democrat. If Republicans want to get in office, they have to get in office. So you're never going to have a Republican agenda. You're never going to have Republican ideology if you're not in office. So does your focus become really sticking to your principles, or does it become getting elected? And what's more important?
And JD, to your point about the presidential elections, you know, I think there's a lot of moderates and independents out there who want to vote Republican, when it comes to that question on whether or not to vote for the Democrat or the Republican, the people who are on the fence here, they've seen the more moderate candidate, John McCain and Mitt Romney, beat up in the primary election. And when he becomes the nominee, there was this chorus of folks saying, don't vote for this guy, don't vote for this guy. And then now they say, well, we support him. There's this coalescing that goes on after the primary conventions. And for a lot of people, that's just too much gymnastics to do politically when they say, no, we didn't like this guy in the primary, but now he's our guy. You know, it sets up a problem for the party, and
it's an interesting premise you're putting forward, and let me try to synthesize but what you're saying, Morgan, and what you're trying to get to too, John. The notion of creative tension, having been through crowded primaries before, you say, look, this discussion is what we absolutely need to have. And people of principle can have these disagreements, but we'll settle it at the ballot box. And the popularity of the argument will carry the day along with the principles. To your point, the fact is that this kind of competition is a fact of life. And to suggest that somehow John McCain in 2008 or Mitt Romney in 2012 sat meekly by when instead they had their arsenal of responses. Look, what happens in the primaries happens. And perhaps there's a double standard. Perhaps the Democrats could have that brutal fight between Senator Obama and then Senator Clinton back in 2008, and all is forgiven. But I think the rough and tumble of politics is something that you cannot divorce from the process, and it will continue.
But it seems contra to the Big Ten idea in Reagan's 11th Amendment.
The 11th Commandment came from Reagan in 1988.
I don't think he's saying we need a big battle. I think he's saying it's okay to disagree, and through that, maybe we'll create something newer and better.
And you don't have to disagree in such an overt and harsh way.
It is, well, I'm glad that we're agreeing to disagree. Just a historical,
in a not harsh way.
Just a historical note on what Ronald Reagan had to say. That advice came in 1988. In 1976, Ronald Reagan, as a former governor of California, challenged a sitting Republican president in Gerald Ford. So the Gipper had a different point of view a little earlier on the timeline, but it's worth noting, and so it goes.
Fair enough. We want to hear from you. We got to get to social media, guys, real quickly. We want to put the contact info up on the screen. But has CPAC gone mainstream? Maybe that's a good question to ask here. Some of the moderate or rhino candidates we're seeing have been accused of that title, speaking yesterday. But what do you think about Christie's comments, Paul Ryan's comments, Marco Rubio's comments? We want to hear from you. Tweet us directly at NewsmaxTV, hashtag America's Forum, or email us, contact@newsmaxtv.com, or find us on Facebook, facebook.com/NewsmaxTV. When we return, Russia's control of most of the natural gas reserves in Europe is a sword over the heads of the Ukrainians. We'll have more on that issue when we come right back.
Federal